It over. It over. Yeah. Yeah.
Good morning, afternoon, 12:30, noon, good noon. How are you this noon? Good? Yes? So if you're awake? So if you're less awake? So you can get up? A couple of things before we get started that I have been reminded of, and I thought I had a list as my first slide, and I didn't slide it in there, so in my last class, I didn't do a great job of it. So I want to talk about a couple of things. Number one, your workbooks are due before your labs on Friday, okay? Now, the time that's up there right now is midnight, and this is kind of because it was the first day and we weren't sure whether your fellows would like to upload it or not. They've all unanimously said, please upload it, all right? So upload them before your labs on Friday. In addition to that, your Cengage is due before this class. The due date is at 12:30 each time. You do have 3 days. You have a late policy, you get 10% off after now, right? But do that. If you're having some problems logging in, and you want to say, hey, look, I had these problems logging in, then I may make an exception for you and give you a little bit more time, but I can't do that unless you send me an email. Right? Or send your fellow an email, either one, or both, you know, it might get to fast, one of us might get to faster than the other. So that's workbooks, Cengage. The third thing is, and this was just brought up to me, is that you have 3 books that you can choose from to read in this class and write your civil rights paper using as a reference, right? And so those 3 approved books are Pillars of the Flower Moon, Fast, and Down Girl, right? So those are in your syllabus, they're listed there, and it was asked earlier as class started today, should we start reading that? So because our thesis statements due pretty soon, and my answer said yes. Get those books back, one of those books, not all of those books, get one of those books, your choice, as soon as possible. okay? So you can begin writing. As part of the way that we use this for the purposes of academic integrity and plagiarism checking and things like that, is we use Turnitin, but we also use an AI detector. And so one of the things that has been discovered is that artificial intelligence are pretty intelligent, and they can write papers just as well as most freshmen in college.
Better.
Sometimes better. And so we now have a way to check and see if you let AI write the paper. So don't, right? So don't. It's also you, right? So those are my quick brief before class announcements. If you did not go to your lab on Friday, I sent out a email on Thursday night, right? If you didn't go to your lab on Friday, you need to go. It's worth 10% of your grade, what you're doing in that lab. So go to lab, all right? As I said on last Wednesday, this is the motto of the University of Oklahoma, Chiwi et Republicae, which means for the citizen, for the benefit of the citizen of the state. And the goal of this class is to make you into citizens. Okay, and a citizen is very different than a subject. And let's talk about that concept, right? Because, oh, and there's one other thing, sorry, I had one more kind of administrative thing. If you will look in under Canvas in modules for week 2, this is week 2, you'll see these lecture notes up there. And you'll also see a Word document that has questions that go along with the lecture. Okay? There are 4, there's usually somewhere between 3 to 5 questions. And they're general questions, but they're where we draw, if we say, hey, you know, lecture is also on your exams. These questions are where we draw from to make multiple choice questions for your exam and also essay questions, right? So those are up on Canvas. If you like to write your notes, and so if you want to put them off before, they're usually up by the morning, you know, by 9 a.m. or so, okay? And you can print them, you can put them on your tablet, write on your tablet. You can type on them, you can download them and type on them while you're taking those in class, whatever. But just so you know, if you are writing separately, you can also look at those and just get an idea of where the focus is for the class. Okay. So this idea of citizens versus subjects. The big question is, why do we choose democracy anyway? How do we even get there? And it starts with Aristotle. Aristotle talks about natural law, people discerning what is right using logic, as opposed to what? What? Using emotions, maybe, okay. What else? How are people making big decisions about governance at the time? What? Mob? You know, this is a problem that Aristotle has, kind of this idea of the demos, right? There's this idea that, you know, we would overthrow in a mob and it would be based on emotion, right? And that's problematic for Aristotle. You're absolutely right. Okay? If I am in charge, right? You put me in charge, and I'm making a decision about what our nation is going to do, how might I be making decisions at this time? Maybe self-interest, absolutely. Okay. What would I use to back that up? Now we're getting into Machiavelli. But Aristotle was pointing out that at the time, maybe a swan lands on the temple of Apollo, and that is a sign from the gods that it's okay to go to war or sue for peace, as interpreted by whom? What? The ruler or someone that's controlled by the ruler, the priests of Apollo, right? And we have this connection connection, right? Machiavelli, of course, talks about it later, between the use of religion by rulers to suppress masses as a tool to explain, right? And Aristotle's like, we really shouldn't do that. We should come up with the right thing to do using logic. Both of these ideas, this mob mentality and this emotion, but also this interpretation on a divine will is also something that is suspect. You know, we're given brains. We have them. We should use them. Right? During the Enlightenment, we see this go a little further. And the Enlightenment is brought on actually by the Protestant Reformation, sorry. The Protestant Reformation. So what is the Protestant Reformation? What happens there? Oh, yeah.
I might be wrong, but that's where the Protestants split away from the Catholic Church.
It is, okay. Why?
Because the Catholic Church didn't want them thinking for themselves. Well, that's kind of, but yeah, they wanted to have the Bible and like learn for themselves on their own as opposed to being told what they're doing.
Okay, and that's a pretty good summation, right? Martin Luther, who's a Catholic priest, basically says, hey, people should be taught how to read and write for themselves. People should be able to talk to God themselves and determine what God is and what God wants. This is revolutionary. So we get up with the Protestant Reformation. Did you have something to add? And I already got it. Sorry.
Just one more student.
Okay. So this brings on also the Enlightenment, where people say, hey, look, if we can figure out for ourselves what God is, what God says, right? Then we can figure out who the mayor ought to be, or how government ought to be, or who is a good ruler, right? And so these things are happening during the Enlightenment. And then we have, at this time, we have Hobbes, and we take Hobbes with a little grain of salt, right? You guys know any good quotes from Hobbes? His best quote is this. It says, prior to the creation of government and the system that we live in, life was nasty, brutish, and short. Right? He says, we entered into a social contract eons ago, hundreds of years ago, where we people said, hey, if you ruler will keep us, any ideas? Safe, right? From internal violence and external violence, then it's a deal. You can be the ruler. We'll be the subjects. Social contract. Now remember, Hobbes is writing this for a king, right? So while he talks about a social contract and the consent of the governed, he's saying people 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago can consent to be governed in this way. And once they've done it, this contract is done as long as there is a security. Okay? You give us security, we give you fealty. Done. Okay? Locke says, couple of things. Yeah, I think this consider the government thing is, you're right. You know, I think this is a social contract that we're making here. But if there are these natural rights, natural laws that create things like a social contract, then there are also natural rights, which means governments have more responsibility than just security. They have more responsibility with that. And specifically, Locke is going to talk about things like justice. Locke is gonna talk about life, security, right? Individual rights, liberty, and the right to own property. Okay? And he's gonna say that if government does not provide those things, then government has broken the social contract. Now, it's important for you to know this, okay? And it's important for you to know this because John Locke was one of the key thinkers that people were thinking about at the time of the American Revolution. This is who they were reading. So they're reading John Locke. And they're thinking, there seem to be some discrepancies. And they're also reading Adam Smith. And I did give you a link to Wealth of Nations. You don't have to read it, all right? Just there in case you feel like it, light reading on a Saturday night, why not? Okay. But the key to Wealth of Nations is kind of this. Adam Smith says, hey, look, the problem is we're this system of mercantilism in which a few countries own all these means of production through colonialism means that there are going to be permanently nations that are unable to live up to their potential, right? And he says, if we look at what is the potential of each nation is able to run its own economy, and they're able to trade fairly, actually, he says, not freely, then you'll have a wealth of nations. All nations will be wealthy. Thomas Paine is also writing just before the revolution. And he writes a pamphlet called Common Sense. And he says, it's common sense that an island should not rule a continent. It's common sense that people should get justice from their peers. It's common sense that the American colonies lead Great Britain. There's a whole, you can read that too. It's linked, right? The key to this pamphlet is this. In the American colonies, it sold 1 million copies. There were only 3 million people living there. That's what I would call a bestseller. And it funded George Washington's Revolutionary Army. He gave all the sales proceeds. So this is what people are reading. This is what they're thinking about, okay? And so you guys read the Declaration of Independence. Let's talk about the Declaration of Independence. What are some things that stood out to you, right? I do want to say it kind of starts like this. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to break away from another people. In other words, dear John, we're leaving, right? I mean, that's what it is. And by the way, it's not us, it's you. And so everybody knows, they even say this, so we're gonna put this out there so that all the nations understand what it is you did wrong, okay? So they have posted it on Reddit or Facebook or Insta, I don't know, right? Not sure how to do that.
TikTok wasn't that just yet.
TikTok wasn't quite there yet, but this is essentially the same. They posted it for the world to see. Dear John, we're out. You're a bad person, this is why. Okay? So what sticks out to you? What are some things that stick out to you? Yes, right there.
Well, in the Declaration of Independence, it was the main examples that the people felt that they were facing tyranny, which is like the oppressive role of government from the king in Britain. So they listed out many examples of what they believe their rights should be protected.
Absolutely. So there's a list of grievances, right? We're going to be specific. I mean, it says something like, you know, these are not for transient, either transient reasons. These are some serious things that are happening. It's not because you left the toilet seat up, right? It's because you hit me in the face, right? What else we got? You got an answer. Something stood out to you. That's right. There's a minute. Yes? You, there is something that stood out to you. You're pretending. Don't be shy, guys. I will bring my box here. Oh, look, right there.
We can bring the box back.
Let's
I
see.
just laughed over the fact that it said men, it literally meant all men. And it
What?
literally meant all men, didn't count women, didn't count anybody else.
Oh, absolutely, right?
Selectively, that.
So men, it did not mean mankind. That's absolutely true, right? Abigail Adams was hoping for more, right?
Thanks for mentioning.
But, you know, but they still said something pretty, and in particular Jefferson, said something really amazing right here, right? And it's this abstract truth, right? This idea that all men are created equal. Did everybody believe that in 1776? Absolutely not. Does everybody believe it now? No, but it's closer, right? It's closer. So it's this idea that, you know, this is a revolutionary document, and he says, well, duh, like everybody knows, this is how he starts. So like, you know, like everybody knows, that all men are created equal. Since when? Right? We've never thought that. But words have power. And this idea, this concept, this ideal resonates. Okay? And so we're going to see this again and again. Right? There's some other things he talks about there. He talks about using one straight from Locke, absolutely. He says, you know, that government is required to provide what? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, so if we veered off of Locke for a second, right? Because Locke would say property, right? And so my question for you, this is actually your second question of those focus questions there, is what is happiness in 1776? You guys have any ideas?
I know this one comes back when we're talking about.
Any ideas?
You got something right here?
Saying having money, having power, or being married.
Okay, but having money, having power, I mean, you're not that far off. Owning property, having money, having power. Being able to speak your mind without being shot at by some British troops, sure, right?
Just the ability to go out and do what you wanted with your life, including career being governed by
Closest.
fulfillment of your wants and needs.
You said fulfillment, that's exactly correct, all right? Exactly correct, okay? What's your name? Harlan. Harlan. So Harlan's exactly correct, okay? It means fulfillment. In other words, Jefferson says something crazy here. He says government has an obligation to ensure that you can be all you can be. Right? It's like the army, right? Right? That you can live up to your potential. Jefferson says government has an obligation to provide a society in which citizens can be everything that they absolutely can be, fulfilled. Right? I want you guys to take just a second. And I want you to think about your personal fulfillment. Because you're young. And so therefore, you know, you can still see the future as a bright, shiny place. As do I, of course. But I want you to think about what your personal fulfillment is. What is it? Give it to me in a few words. What's fulfillment for you? What does it mean? For you, you.
Starbucks, way to class.
For Eric, it's boiled down to decent coffee on the way to class. All right, fair enough.
Having a career in a creative field.
A career in a creative field, fulfillment.
Being able to do something I enjoy, not just to survive.
Okay, being able to do something you enjoy, not just survive. Right here? Oh, go ahead. Oh.
Setting a long-term continuous goal and being able to reach that.
Being able to set long-term continuous goals and reach them.
Making good memories with good people.
Good memories, good people.
Good memories, good people, okay? Over here. Oh.
Living in the moment.
Living in the moment,
At all moments.
at all moments.
At all.
It's very hard, living in the present at all times.
Yeah, like people accomplishing your goals and being able to like reach them without having an overarching.
Okay,
These are very like abstract.
no, this is perfect.
Being able to provide for those I care for.
Be able to provide for one you care for, being able to do what you want to do without some overarching force making you,
Never working for another person again.
never working for another person again.
I can't second that. I don't have happiness back here.
Well, they'll work on it, right? They'll work on it. I mean, the thing is fulfillment is individual. It is individual. And so whenever I say, I want what Jefferson wants, which is a government that provides the opportunity for me to live up to my potential, to be all that I can be, to be fulfilled, that means that I want government to provide something where I can do that, and you 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 can all do it, whatever that is. Think about that. That's a pretty big ask. You have one more, Eric? Okay. So from Locke to Jefferson to the Declaration, again, based on the consent of the governed, the social contract theory has become the modern idea of what a republic is. Okay? So Locke is going to talk about protection of equality and liberties. He's going to talk about life, liberty, protection of property. Happiness, it becomes for Jefferson, which is somewhat greater than property, unless you read Madison on property, which I can also link that if you want to. I think it's in your files. And when he says, hey, property is more than just owning a thing. Property is your work, your talent, your ambition, right? So Jefferson and Madison sees property the same way that Jefferson sees happiness. Okay? But he also says there's not just a right to revolt if government is unjust. There's a duty to revolt if government is unjust. And one of the things that my earlier class remarked on is they talked about how in the Declaration, over and over, they said, look, we tried. We tried to reach out to you. It was pointed out the Olive Branch petition was a good example of that. We petitioned you. We sought delegates. We tried to get representation and you denied us. And because you denied us, then this is our option, right? So there's not an armed revolt because they didn't want to try legal means. There's an armed revolt because they did try legal means. And these were not granted. So the Declaration, rebellion, liberty, solidarity, optimistic, egalitarian. We're all in this together. We're all equal. And we see this reflected in those first state constitutions, the first 13 states in their individual constitutions. Because remember, the Articles of Confederation is going to bind them together, and it's not going to have a lot of power, which we're going to talk about on Wednesday, right? But in those individual state constitutions, you see it in their bills of rights. You see this kind of spirit of equality and liberty throughout. We have a second founding in the United States. It's the Civil War. The Civil War, in many ways, is dealing with compromises that were made in forming the Constitution. But Lincoln, whenever he is talking about the role of the Union, the United States in the Civil War, he does not refer to the Constitution, because the Constitution is a framework, right? It's a legal framework. It is not prose and poetry and idealism. It's the Declaration that has that. And he said, all men are created equal is the standard maxim of a free society. He said Jefferson, who was a flawed person, don't get me wrong, right? Had the coolness, forecast, and capacity to introduce into a merely revolutionary document an abstract truth, applicable to all men at all times, and so to embalm it there by sticking it in there, whether it was true that day or believed that day by only a minority of people, it grew. So that today and all coming days it shall be a rebuke and a stumbling block to the very harbingers of reappearing tyranny and oppression. The emblem of humanity, the Declaration. He's saying, look, Jefferson knew that what was going on around him was not perfect. But he put something here to make us strive toward it. Right? When we think about the Constitution, it's the same thing. Toward a more perfect union. This isn't it. But this is better than that. We're getting it. We also have the issue of women's rights. In 1848, we have Seneca Falls Declaration, in which the delegates of Seneca Falls basically take the Declaration of Independence and they say, by all men, you mean men and women. Right? And they talk about millennia of oppression of men over women. Harry Chapman Catt in 1917, while working for women's suffrage and women's equality, says ours is a nation born of revolution, a rebellion against a system of government so securely entrenched in the customs and traditions of human society that in 1776 it seemed impregnable. Think about that, right? We hadn't had anything close to a republic in 2,000 years. That's a big deal. It seemed impregnable from the beginning of things. Nations have been ruled by kings and for kings, while the people served and paid the costs. Being a subject is to serve. Being a citizen is to make decisions and be represented. The American Revolutionists boldly proclaimed the heresies. Governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, and as Harry Chapman Catt pointing out, half of us are women, and we're not consensual. We have a third period of founding. You guys read Letter from Birmingham Jail. In his I Have a Dream speech, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. says, I say to you today, my friends, even though we face difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths self-evident, that all men are created equal. It's talking 200 years later and saying, we're still not doing it, guys. But I have a dream that this ideal ingrained in the Declaration of Independence will one day be born out. So he writes a letter from Birmingham Jail. What are some things about it that struck you guys? Eric has a microphone over here.
Third row.
The letter from Birmingham Jail was very emotional, charged. We had a feel to it like that.
Oh, absolutely, right? I mean, understand that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is educated as a reverend. He's very strongly rooted in Christian principles and the teachings of Christ, right? And he's going to use that certainly in this letter.
And he was turned down from being pastor here in Oklahoma City.
And he was turned down, so he was not hired. Over here.
The part that always stands out to me is the phrase where he talks about how the enemy of progress is the white moderate who is more devoted to order than justice.
Okay, and so getting back to this idea of security, right? This is Hobbes's security. This idea that order is more important than liberty or equality, right? Is a stumbling block. Yes, we're sympathetic, just wait. Right? We're sympathetic, just hold on. We're with you, just not quite yet. Right? And he says, justice delayed is justice denied. Right? What else stood out to you? Over here?
When he talked about his daughter and how she couldn't go to the amusement park because she was of color.
You know, that's one that always stands out to me too. And he says, I watch as I see my daughter and her perfect self, her human perfect person, and how her brain is being clouded with hatred and warped with hatred for the white man because of what society and white people are doing. And he says, and this is, I think, really cool, because he noted this. He says, hey, look, you're hurting the way she is able to occupy her space as a human because of your faith, because of your society. Right? It's just a kid. And I'm watching it happen. What else?
Even through all of what he's saying, he still doesn't wish any ill will for anyone, even the people who like put down and disagree with him, which is something that people can probably take to heart a little more today.
Sure. I mean, he says, hey, look, there's a way to approach this. And we talked in my morning class, certainly, about his concept of nonviolence. And we'll talk about that more when we get to civil rights as well. But he
Four
says,
steps, right?
huh?
4 steps.
4 steps to nonviolent confrontation. And we'll talk about that as we get to civil rights and what that means. But he points out, hey, look, nonviolence is the way. And why is he a proponent of nonviolence?
He's a proponent of nonviolence because, and especially in the letter, he is talking about how many times there has been direct action to where they have been trying to peacefully protest in a way to where they will be able to see what is going on and nothing is happening. So that's why he's trying to have more people go for the nonviolent approach so that it could be a bigger issue in their face.
Okay, so it has to be direct confrontation, absolutely, right? But nonviolent for a reason. Because people can dismiss violence, right? You know, that this person is living in an unjust world, but what they did was they shot. And so therefore, or they shot this person. Therefore, they're a bad person and they deserve to live in an unjust world, right? We can dismiss it. We can just say, meh. We don't have to pay attention. He's saying by creating a crisis that caused people to think that we are making a much larger impact and a more long-term impact. He wasn't playing the short game, right? He also says the arc of justice, or the arc of justice is long, but it inevitably, you know, the arc of the universe is long, but it inevitably bends towards justice, right? So, back to the time of the founding and the Declaration of Independence. Abigail Adams, a little concerned about multiple things. The one thing she's concerned about, and Madison is going to echo her. She says, hey, look, John, it's all cool, it's all well and good, all this enthusiasm, this idealism, but can any government be free, which is not administered by general stated laws? And who shall frame them? Who shall give them force and energy? In other words, who's making the laws? What are the laws? What's the framework? Who are making laws under that framework? And who enforces them? You can't just rely upon ideals. You have to have a framework of government. Says James Madison next week, but it's actually Wednesday, so you don't have to wait very long. We're going to talk about checks and balances and shared power, federalism. That's it. And a framework for the rule of law. Also things like understanding self-interest, promoting civic influence. Let's have a couple of more slides. We'll get out a whole 5 minutes of talk. But the poetry of revolution is different than the prose of government. People can recite the Declaration of Independence and the preamble to the Constitution. Because it's poetry. It's a set of ideas. People can't tell me what Article 1A says in the Constitution. What Article 2, Part 3 says. Right? The 14th Amendment, Part B. Right?
I can the first.
It gets tough, right? Because a framework of governing is different. Prose as opposed to poetry. But it creates a republic. And the key to a republic is this. Law rules. A person does not rule. A group of people do not rule. Laws rule. Even tyrannies claim to be republics. It's fashionable. You guys on Friday in your labs, I think, had a pretty good idea of where we stand, where the world stands. We've had a backslide in democracy over the past 7 years. Crossing democratic ideals. It does oppose the idea of the divine right of kings. In other words, God or gods or that higher being did not grant power to this person or this group of people. Justice, equality, liberty, solidarity. These are beautiful ideals, and they're going to contrast with the hard reality of government. Who gets a contract to make the highway? A republic requires that the rule of law is over the tides of public sentiment. That means we may all want for this group of people to be beneath us. But our law says no. Okay? A majority is not enough to make that decision. All persons, a minority, a majority, have to follow the rule of the law, including the majority, which I think is sometimes harder than those people who are in the minority. As long as the policies of the majority are lawful. In other words, they derive from the Constitution and have that power. So I'm going to ask you guys this at the very beginning of class on Wednesday. You know, what do you think is the most important to make a democratic